Welcome to the MSL 411, a podcast designed to equip both aspiring and experienced MSLs with the resources they need to level up their career toolkit. The heart of this podcast is to take the same industry knowledge and advice that we share with our own candidates and make it available and accessible to anyone looking for answers. So if you have questions, you've come to the right place. We're here to give you the 411. And without further ado, let's dive right in. Welcome back to the MSL 411 podcast. I'm your host, Linda Eskew, and today we are talking about a topic that I know so many people are curious about, especially people who are aspiring to be in the MSL role, and that is the PharmD route into medical affairs through postdoctoral fellowship. Honestly, I'm really excited about this conversation today because our guest today joining us has a very unique story and a really intentional career path that follows just that. So joining me today is Dr. Obinna Ekechukwu, who is a senior medical science liaison at AstraZeneca, where he supports the thoracic oncology portfolio across Georgia and North Florida. Obinna's path into medical affairs is one that I think so many aspiring MSLs are going to find especially interesting. After he earned his PharmD from the Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine, he completed a postdoctoral medical affairs fellowship with Pharmacyclics, which is an AbbVie company. And he did that before building a successful career in oncology with a couple of organizations, including AbbVie, Sanofi, and now AstraZeneca. And so today we're going to be talking about what that fellowship journey looked like, how it helped launch his MSL career, and what aspiring MSLs and aspiring medical affairs professionals can learn from his experience in particular. So we'll be diving into what it looks like to intentionally build towards medical affairs and why relationships and soft skills matter so much in this role, and then what aspiring MSLs should know if they're considering the fellowship path similar to what Obinna did. So Obi, thank you so much for being here this morning. We're so excited to have you on the podcast.
Thank you so much, Linda. I'm excited to be here and be able to share, the journey and the path because, I get these questions a lot in regards to the MSL role. So I'm happy to be of assistance.
One thing I love about your story is that you had a whole career before pharmacy school, and you can talk a little bit about that. And you actually worked with Verizon, who I'm sure a lot of people listening are familiar with. But what is something from your Verizon days that still shows up in how you work in medical affairs today?
Absolutely. So I think one thing that a lot of people do once they, finish undergrad and you start your first job, a lot of people end up in some sort of customer service facing role in some capacity. So I did the same thing at Verizon. So I started off as a customer service representative and then worked my way up really, really quickly going into technical support. But then I landed in learning and development. So working within and development, I was able to be able to teach, right? So essentially, I'm showcasing how to, triage customer complaints, be able to provide technical support for any issues they might be having with their wireless devices or the network and all those sorts of things, and being able to translate complex technical data from a technology standpoint to representatives to be able to touch customers moving forward. So I think that skill set, being able to understand how to take complex things and package them into more simple, digestible content, and also be able to engage with consumers that you haven't met before, you don't necessarily have a strong relationship with off the bat, is something that's really, really key.
Well, I think that is so evident in how that translates into the MSL role because even from a different industry, technology, you're still able to be a good communicator, which is so important in the MSL role. So you're able to kind of read your audience and be able to explain the information to them, whether it be technology related or medical related. And so obviously you are cut out to be in this type of role. But what is one thing, I always like people to know who you are as a person outside of medical affairs. What is one thing that people might be surprised to learn about you outside of your professional life?
Man, I think there's so many things because some say that, I just have so many skill sets that I don't necessarily talk about or broadcast that often, but I'm an avid cook. So anyone who is close enough to me and follows me on social media or have followed me in the past for quite some time, I used to always showcase my food. So I love to chef it up in the kitchen and create fusion dishes, explore new cultures. So food is something that brings people together, and I love when people enjoy something that I've prepared for them and it takes their senses on a journey. Cooking, I would say, is definitely something that some people might be surprised if they're just getting acquainted with me now and they haven't really followed me for like, years before or anything.
Well, what's your go-to dish? I could make this all day, every day. Everyone would love it. What's your go-to favorite?
Man, there's so many things because I'm such a foodie that I love so many things. But honestly and truly, anything breakfast, I'm always going to be great at. So whether it's pancakes, French toast, name the specialty omelet, biscuits. So the requests that I get from friends and family all the time, because I don't make these too often. Being Nigerian, being able to fuse Southern culture with Nigerian culture is something that was really, really interesting and fun for me. So I have plantain biscuits that I make. So I take the plantains and I cook them down. And from there, I mix them with the biscuit batter and then bake them up. And they just turn out so sweet, delicious, and yummy that I put a nice honey butter on the top. And it just really, really, really gets everybody going on a Saturday morning.
That sounds amazing. I love plantains just from traveling in the past and learning to eat those in so many different forms that as soon as you said the word plantain, I was hooked. So we need
They're
to talk after
huge
this.
in Nigerian culture. So, fried, baked, boiled. There's so many different ways, but I grew up in the South, so being able to take that and put it into the form of a biscuit seemed like a perfect pairing.
I love it. I love it. I'm from the South as well, so I could talk about this stuff all day, biscuits and all the wonderful things, but I know our audience and our listeners would tune out pretty quickly on that, I guess. But let me go one step further. If you could be, of course, you're great at cooking, but if you could be instantly great at one totally random, non-work related skill, what would that be?
So I'm a former athlete. So, I used to play football. I would definitely say that I would love to be just the most amazing football player ever. I think that would be something that would have been really, really rewarding because, you only go so far in terms of what your body and your genetics allow you to do. So I would definitely give myself some strategic advantages in that way to be able to be more competitive on the field.
Nice. Well, I want to keep this conversation moving into our main topic, but I do also want to get to know a little bit more about your early career journey before we got to the fellowship in medical affairs. You kind of told a little bit about your path at Verizon, but can you walk us through your early career path and what life looked like before pharmacy school, and then what made the decision to pursue pharmacy school?
Sure. So yeah, I always kind of like had the inkling that I wanted to work within pharmaceutical industry, but how to get there was something that was unknown to me at the time. So I ended up graduating from undergrad with a degree in biology, but I also happened to pursue a degree in finance as well. So I really, really took to the business courses in addition to my love and interest for science. So I wanted a way that I was going to be able to marry those two disciplines together into a career. So in the midst of trying to get into pharmacy school, that's when I started working at Verizon. I had some student loan debt and, the debt collectors were calling. So I needed to have a job so that way I could at least, continue to pay that while I was pursuing professional school. So while I was there at Verizon, I learned and gathered a lot of great skills that I still use and brought with me into my career within pharmacy school, even, and then moving into everything else, postdoctoral fellowship, and then even into the MSL role. So I definitely say that at Verizon is where I really, really honed in a lot of the strong soft skills and deductive reasoning skills that allowed me to be, I think, successful and maybe probably separated me out and made me look a little bit different than other candidates potentially.
At what point did pharmacy and then later pharma become your bridge between interest in patient care and business and innovation?
So, the innovation part is where I'll start. So I would say that, I was a part of a very, very big technology boom while I was at Verizon. So if everybody thinks back to your cell phones, way back when, And when you used to use the internet on your phone, but the internet looks a little bit different on your device, right? And the reason why is because cellular networks were not able to really hold the data capacity until the launch of 4G LTE. So when you look at your device now, you see 5G there, right? So 5G didn't exist. I mean, initially we were working on like a 3G based network, which is much, much slower. It's it's good for like maybe getting some emails, but you can't do any of the audio and the video things that we do today. So 4G LTE finally opened up a data pathway to allow for large amounts of data to be moved very, very quickly. So being able to see that innovation and also understanding how that innovation was going to impact healthcare moving forward was really, really interesting to me. So from there, considering that I knew I wanted to be able to do a job where I was going to be able to use both, seeing that kind of sparked my interest within pharma. And then that's when I started to pursue it more.
That's so neat how you're able to put those two together and be on the forefront of that and then have that forethought to think, okay, this is going to impact healthcare down the road. So being able to fuse those interests and make the connections there. I loved it. That was something that your mind went to. So you decide to pursue pharmacy school. At what point though did you first learn about the MSL role and what stood out about it to you?
So the exact title and role of medical science liaison, I didn't become quite familiar with until my P2 year of pharmacy school. But before pharmacy school even started, I always knew I wanted to work within pharmaceutical industry. So I had already been well versed with like the very, very big names within pharma. So your Mercks, your Johnson and Johnsons, your Bristol Myers Squibbs, those large entities I was already quite familiar with prior to pharmacy school, but I wasn't necessarily honed in on the specific titles and the roles that people were working in outside of maybe things that are more regulatory focused or sales focused, because of course we all see commercials. So once I got into pharmacy school, though, and I started doing more and more research and understanding of what's going on, I read a article that McKinsey puts out each year, which talks about medical affairs. And it talks about how they project changes that are going to occur within medical affairs over the next few years. So, in reading that, that's when I learned about the medical science liaison role more specifically. And then that's when I began to start considering pursuing that moving forward.
Well, a lot of PharmD students still hear mostly about retail or hospital or even clinical pharmacy paths. I feel like these days maybe the MSL role is getting introduced more at the student level, but maybe still not. I mean, even just a few years ago, people were not hearing about it through their school. Do you feel like you had to create your own roadmap into industry, so to speak?
Absolutely. So my school definitely pushed heavily the clinical pharmacist sort of pathway. And again, it's no fault to our school per se, because I mean, at the end of the day, our professors are speaking on the experiences that they've had, right? And they all work as clinical pharmacists. However, I've seen where clinical pharmacists pivot, and a lot of them pivoted into a medical science liaison based role. So that's kind of like how I carved out a niche for myself and started to look more in depth to it. So I did a internship program my right before my third year began, so right after my second year at Johns Hopkins Home Care Group. So while I was there, there was a rotation that I did there with the investigational drug pharmacy. So from there, that's when I got a closer look to clinical trials, how that process works, and who were they engaging with other than the site monitor. They were engaging with the medical science liaison. So that was like my first up close and personal time when I got to see MSL actually doing the work. And then everything else was just strict interest moving forward from there. I knew I wanted to start my career as a medical science liaison, but I just needed to confirm that through a couple more experiences, which I was able to get later at Bristol Myers Squibb as well as at Bayer. So I would say that those touch points with industry really, really solidified that option for me. And it became something that I started to seek out more in my experiences moving forward.
Well, when you started looking at some of these fellowship programs, I guess go back to where your head was in that time. What were you actually hoping to get out of the experience?
So for me, being that I knew that I wanted to start off my career as a medical science liaison and really, really hone in on that experience, oftentimes when you look at the job descriptions, they talk about copious amounts of experience that they would like to see a person have, whether it's within clinical practice or if they've already been an MSL before. So I knew that if I wanted to be able to start my career as an MSL, I would need to get that experience from somewhere. So in seeking out a fellowship program, I wanted to make sure that I went somewhere that was going to allow me to have a strong field medical experience. So that way I'd be able to have something to utilize for interviews to make myself a more well-rounded candidate, even though I was very early in my career.
Well, and I was thinking back on something that you mentioned to me earlier before we started recording this podcast episode, just when we were talking about it and kind of forming the idea for it. But you said that you weren't necessarily even chasing a company or a company name hoping to be retained after the fellowship. You really were just chasing the experiences, like you said, that would help you become more competitive for the role that you wanted. And I feel like, some people go in with that mindset. Some people go in with the hope of, I really want to work at this company. I want to be onboarded full time after this fellowship. I hope to stay there, build my career there. But I like your approach as well of just looking for the experience, looking for the knowledge gained, and then taking that knowledge, that experience, and being able to see where it takes you. Can you talk more about that mindset? I know you kind of touched on it a little bit, but maybe kind of talk more about where your head was there and that thought process at the time.
Yeah, so the main thing is that when I was going into the fellowship process, I had four big buckets of things that I was thinking about. Number one, I really, really had a strong passion for oncology. And the reason why is that being a pharmacist, I wanted to stay within a disease state that was going to continue to be medically managed. I didn't want all the drug knowledge that I built up over the past 4 years to be pushed to the side because I decided to embark on a disease state that's primarily medical device, right? So I wanted to stay in oncology, and also too because it's dynamic, it's impactful. You're able to see how the data translates into the impact on people's lives and their caregivers' lives, and how you're either able to eradicate disease or give a quality of life that they wouldn't have had without that innovation happening. Just not to segue too quickly, but I just got back from ASCO, and this year we saw some remarkable data in pancreatic cancer that we have not seen. So where we're able to now have a pill for patients with metastatic pancreatic cancer that extends life. At this point in time, 13.7 months was the median overall survival from that study, which is remarkable for a pancreatic cancer study. So being able to see innovation like that really, really shows strong impacts on very, very, very terrible diseases that impact a lot of people. Really, really held my heart tight when it came to choosing oncology. After that, I wanted to make sure that I got a field medical experience. So that's something that I really, really was hard fast on whenever I went through the interview process. I wanted to make sure that I was going to be able to have experiences directly with the field, whether that's MSL field rides, being able to develop field materials, being able to train, being able to participate in any sort of engagements with key opinion leaders. Those were experiences that I wanted to have throughout my fellowship to be able to prepare me for what's to come next. Then after that, I started getting into things like, okay, let's take a look at company to see what company culture is like, all those sorts of things. And then lastly, at the very bottom of the list, pipeline. So understanding like, okay, where is this company potentially going in terms of their pipeline and what they have coming and how they could potentially grow and expand, that sort of.
Well, I think that's so strategic, really, just to have that multi-pronged attack of finding the one that's going to set you up the best for a future career and taking your experience and wanting to add on to that. I know a lot of people maybe don't have that much forethought, or they're just looking for any program or don't know what to look for, don't know what things they should be evaluating when looking for a program. So this is going to be so helpful for all kinds of people that are in your shoes, that are considering fellowships and not knowing what is important, what's not. Looking back now, what do you think aspiring fellows should pay more attention to when evaluating programs? Some of the things you've already mentioned, but are there any other things you might lead them toward?
So I think it's twofold. I think one, they have to understand what's going to be most comfortable for them. Because for some people, having their experience happen in a certain city or in a certain part of the country is really important for them, and they need that support to be able to thrive in what they're doing. For others, that's not so important. So I would definitely say you have to understand what your hierarchy of needs is personally, and then be able to apply that to what you're seeking moving forward. Now, if we want to get more in depth in terms of specifically to a company, do their missions and values align with what you're looking for and what you're looking to gain from the experience that you're going to have there? When you look at those preceptors that would be responsible for handling you, are you going to be able to learn from them and have some sort of professional bond with them that you're going to be able to gain from the experiences that they share with you, and also be given the opportunity to fail, right? Be
Hmm.
given the opportunity to learn from mistakes in a graceful manner. So I think being able to be in environment that allows you to have a level of autonomy along with a strong level of responsibility where you're not necessarily viewed as a fellow, but you're actually viewed more like an FTE. You just happen to be a fellow, I think are the most enriching programs and prepare candidates the best for their first role post fellowship.
Well, it kind of lets you learn with a safety net, so to speak, where you do have that real world experience. You are learning medical affairs from the inside, but you still are in that fellowship program. So it's still a learning role and the safety net of that, I guess. And so being able to spread your wings while also knowing that you're kind of protected under that you can make mistakes and it be viewed as a learning process instead of a fireable offense or anything like that. Like you're kind of protected because it is a learning program. And I think that's fantastic. And you definitely got a chance to learn medical affairs from the inside during your fellowship with pharmacyclics or AbbVie, and you started in medical communications and worked closely with the field. What did that teach you about how MSLs are supported internally?
It taught me a lot. It taught me first and foremost that sometimes without direct MSL experience, you might not necessarily understand how things that are created from an HQ perspective impact the field. So oftentimes, you might create all these fancy materials for the field and the deck might look phenomenal to you, but if you haven't had the experience of seeing it used in the field or how doctors respond to it, then it might not be as impactful as you think it is. So I think being able to take testimonies from the MSLs in assisting in creating their materials, I was able to take their feedback in and incorporate that a lot more. So that way the flow of the decks was better, be able to create a library system so that that way they can get to their resources, their materials easier because they're based on themes that they often talk about within the field. So certain assets are all aggregated into the same theme, which makes it easier for them to be able to cycle through different pieces of data for their KOLs during conversations. So there's just subtle things like that that really change how you do things from an HQ perspective to make things more efficient for the field.
Mhm. It's such a unique perspective, I think, that a lot of people don't get entering an MSL role of having that understanding of the cooperation between departments like that. And of course, you worked on field medical materials, you worked on training decks, like you said, disease state training, onboarding resources, all of those sorts of things. How did building tools for the MSLs help you understand that role in specific more deeply?
So honestly and truly, the way that I learn most is by doing hands-on things. So it immersed me in a lot of different ways. So number one, it immersed me in the data, all the data that's actually relevant and being talked about on a regular basis. It also gave me a strong understanding of the proper processes and procedures. At the end of the day, we work in a very, very highly regulated field. So there's compliance measures that have to be taken in the dissemination of data, whether it's on your iPad or whether it's verbally through an engagement. So there's a way that you have to approach it and do certain things. So this process in working on those different types of materials allowed me to understand the compliance of it all as well to ensure that everything was being done in an ethical fashion. So I think those subtle caveats prepared me in a certain way to be able to, have a stronger understanding of how all these different moving parts work together harmoniously.
valuable experience. And one thing that you mentioned to me again earlier in a conversation, you mentioned supporting clinical trial acceleration efforts through roundtable discussions with study sites. What did that experience teach you about the broader impact that medical affairs can have?
It actually taught me a lot. So oftentimes we see clinical trials happen, but when you're operating in a disease that's very, very rare, the efforts that it takes to be able to accrue patients to that trial are very, very difficult. So I was working on a rare disease focused roundtable. And what I was able to do is think about how these various clinical trial sites could potentially learn from one another. So oftentimes we have the sponsor will go in and communicate with that clinical trial site, but it's almost just that two-way street of communication where the sponsor is coming in asking, why are you not recruiting? And the site is saying, we're looking for patients. We just haven't found any. Give us time, right? So the roundtables allow for a site peer-to-peer interaction to happen. So you can take sites that are doing well and having strong performance from a recruitment standpoint, and they can share best practices with somebody who might not be performing as well. And that meeting of the minds is really, really helpful in a sense because it allows them to learn from one another versus it looking like it's just coming down from the sponsor. So being able to create a collective to understand what these challenges and barriers are and maybe share a best practice that isn't implemented at a different site to be able to help to accrue a little bit better, make that process more simple. And then from there, the sponsor can step in and provide additional resources that can maybe make things even better. So whether it's other patient assistance-based programs for lodging, food, or now just even getting an Uber or some sort of ride share service to make appointments, things like that are all different ways that that particular process can be done and run more smoothly.
Well, I hope that the people listening to this episode, especially these aspiring MSLs who have a background like yours where they're PharmD and maybe have not thought about a fellowship program or are thinking about it but not sure if it would help. I hope they're hearing about all these experiences that you had, and I hope their minds are blown, honestly, right now, because this is unbelievable the amount of things that you got to do with a pharma company as an employee of a pharma company in a fellowship program that specifically prepare you for stepping into medical affairs and the MSL role in specific. But I want to hear from you though, how did all these internal experiences prepare you, or how did you feel they prepared you for stepping into the field as an MSL yourself?
So I would definitely say that, it gave me everything that I needed in terms of a strong foundation, but nothing gave me the biggest foundation to prepare me for my first MSL role post fellowship than when I was actually given a territory on my own. So learn by doing is how adults learn. We learn through how we engage and how we do things and how we fail and then how we succeed after we overcome those challenges. So I was given the Pacific Northwest territory for my company because we had a vacancy in that specific territory. And for some odd reason, we were not able to fill that void for quite some time. So the Pacific Northwest is notoriously difficult to recruit for. So that presented a nice opportunity for me to be able to go ahead and get that hands-on experience as an MSL within my own territory. So I would say that that's what prepared me the most because I was able to actually see what those challenges are, especially in a difficult territory like the Pacific Northwest. So for one, from an access standpoint, to be able to even meet with providers and show them that you can bring value to them and to their site was a challenge that I was able to overcome while I was in that capacity. And then once you get in, being able to build the relationship up enough so should you depart, the next person can pick up where you left off. So being able to get that experience within the fellowship capacity was paramount for why I was able to get my next role post fellowship.
And that's one of the wildest parts of your story to me. And I say wild in the coolest way possible, that as a fellow, you ended up covering the Pacific Northwest territory for a pharma company. That doesn't always happen for fellows, but that is amazing and speaks highly of how the company thought about you as one of their fellows as well. So, I mean, kudos to you for that. But for people listening who might not realize it, that's not exactly an easy territory. The Pacific Northwest, notoriously, the Pacific Northwest and the New England/Northeast are extremely difficult regions to cover for MSLs from an access standpoint, just from multiple standpoints, but access being a main one. It is just notoriously difficult for MSLs, even with a couple of years of experience under their belt. So, knowing that and being put in that position, although exciting and encouraging and all of that, it had to be a little bit scary, I guess, or I would be scared at least. Maybe not you, but what was it like stepping into that environment without someone actually covering it before you?
It was very, very difficult. So there's definitely days where I had that self-doubt where I'm like, can I really do this? Can I? Not sure. But what gave me resolve was there was someone that was in the territory that I did have access to that gave me a lay of the land. So this is one of the beauties, one of the few beauties that you probably hear from having a alliance agreement with another company for your product. So while I was at AbbVie, we shared licensing for the drug that I was working on with J&J. So the J&J Pacific Northwest rep was instrumental in giving me a lay of the land and giving me some introductions to the key players within the territory to help me to overcome and get some access into those institutions. So that way I could kind of break the ice after an introduction from him. So that was super helpful for me in having him as a colleague, even though he works for a completely different company, to be able to at least get started within that territory. So at the end of the day, when it comes to being MSL, the relationships matter, and all the different relationships that you have, whether they're KOL relationships, internal work relationships, cross-functional collaboration from a different functional area, or a completely different company, all those relationships matter and can help you, but you don't know when you're going to need it.
Mhm. And I guess even still, you had to still have moments where you thought, okay, I'm either gonna figure this out fast or completely crash and burn. I mean, we all have, imposter syndrome or feelings of self doubt, things like that. What mindset helped you push through?
I think my push through moment was when I got my first win. So you have to understand that, like, people have definitely done the job before you, and you've seen it done well with other people on your team or in other capacities at other companies. So it's not that it's unattainable or unachievable. You just have to figure out what works well for you. So, of course, I'd had experiences already and I'd seen the job done by other people. So I'm taking small, small things from all the successes and wins I've seen others have, and I put all those things into my toolkit. But now it's time for me to grab my tools and utilize them to have my own success. So there's a trial and error process that comes with that. And then also you have to understand as well that the number one thing about the MSL role is being able to create and cultivate relationships. That doesn't happen overnight. So understanding and giving yourself grace to that, some of these things are going to take time before you build up enough inertia to move forward is also something that I would tell myself, and understand that, like, hey, maybe we need to measure our progress in a different way. So that's what was really, really helpful for me to continue to push forward even when things were very difficult initially.
And you mentioned to me earlier about having to get really creative with access and relationship building. And you kind of touched on that just a second ago with having someone that you could kind of turn to who is in that same geography. But what are some other things in your toolkit that actually worked for you with access and building those relationships within the geography?
One of the major things that was really helpful is utilizing my tools that I had. So of course, everybody uses Viva in some sort of capacity or some sort of customer relations platform. So I had access to a tool called Viva Link. This allows you to see basically your KOL's involvement in various things, whether it's congresses, data that they've recently published, a brief bio on them. So that way you can learn more about your KOL and their interests. So I wanted to always be able to speak to things to people I wanted to meet for the first time that they were interested in. So I used that as a tool to be able to get them excited and want to respond to me because it's in response to something that they're already either presenting or they recently published. So that was one way that was really helpful for me was being able to get KOLs excited about wanting to speak with me about something that they were already excited about speaking on because otherwise they wouldn't be presenting on it, right? That was something that was really, really helpful for me in terms of getting my foot in the door and getting responses to certain emails. And also, don't be afraid to go old school. I know we have all this data, all this access to all this technology, but a phone call sometimes is golden. So picking up the phone and actually calling actually helped me a lot as well. So where I could get in touch with like the office manager and understand scheduling and what's a little bit better in terms of the provider's schedule. So you don't learn all these things through just sending cold emails and praying for a response, but you actually have to meet them where they are. And sometimes it's a phone call.
Yeah, sometimes the oldest methods work the best, and you never know where your thought leader is, whether they've been in the game for decades and maybe they do everything by telephone and don't like these newfangled things like video calls and such, or maybe you have a younger thought leader and they really text everything and email and that's where they live. I mean, yeah, you got to kind of find out what works, and sometimes those tried and true methods of just picking up the phone and dialing is what's going to win them over. So I love that. Well, I want to talk about how you were able to find your scientific fit within pharma. So, of course, you had exposure to both oncology and rare disease during your rotations in your fellowship. And you kind of talked a little bit at the beginning of our conversation today about what drew you specifically to oncology as a medical affairs professional. But, oncology is constantly evolving, which is one of the things that drew you more to it. But how do you stay grounded in such a dynamic and constantly changing and evolving in a positive way therapeutic area?
It's tough because oncology is moving really, 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 really quickly. As mentioned earlier, I work in the thoracic oncology space, so it's very, very dynamic. Lots of new data constantly all the time. So you have to digest the data as quickly as you can in a medium where you're going to be able to retain it more. So for me, I do that a lot of different ways. One, whenever I attend meetings, I try to set aside some time to not just think about it from a work perspective, but actually digest what it means for the entire landscape on the data that I might be seeing at a specific medical congress, for example. But then again, as well, there's a lot of great mediums now that make it easy to digest data on the go. So research to practice has a great medium where you're able to listen in to these esteemed KOLs presenting on various topics and disease areas. So the podcast format, being able to get that audio in, has been really, really great. There's copious webinars now that are always being broadcast from various life sciences companies too. So I view those for the disease areas of interest to me as well, just to stay abreast on what these clinicians think is most current and most practice impacting. So that's part of the way that I get around it. Then the rest of it is, pretty much old school. Make sure that I'm staying on top of new data as it comes out and then keeping on top of what the current guidelines are and trying to anticipate how things could potentially shift as we await the newer data that's to come.
I love that you mentioned the podcast thing. Do you use Notebook LM?
I do use Notebook LM.
I
So
love it.
luckily, I have a lot of access to a lot of great tools at AstraZeneca, Notebook LM being one of them. So it's a
Yes.
phenomenal tool to be able to have your resources all logged in there. We have a great team that really, really set us up for success as an MSL team with Notebook LM, where we've created a lot of different disease area pods within there with the data that's needed. So you can ask it anything based on what's recent, what's coming out. And of course, after ASCO, we're doing an update to it currently right now. It's just great. So yeah, Notebook LM is one. We also have, of course, all the various large language models as well, whether it be Claude, Gemini, GPT, Grok. So all of those various entities as well, those are helpful too. So yeah, a lot of these tools and resources that we have now, I wish I had them a few years ago. would have saved me a lot of time and effort with certain things. But yes, I definitely use Notebook LM for sure.
Well, I ask because I mean, we use that on our own team even when we're trying to, learn everything we can about a new client or their pipeline, or an existing client has something new that they're building a team out for. We always like to understand the science, and you can research it. We train our teams on all that, but also if you can just make it into a digestible podcast that's interesting to listen to, like that's fantastic. And so I had to ask, if that was a tool that you use, because if you don't, you need to, but it sounds like you're already on that
On
train. So
top of it, on top of it, they introduced it to us last year, and then ever since then, I've been playing around with it more and more.
it's fantastic. Well, I'm getting us off topic, but I do want to continue talking about oncology and your work there, because you work, or you have worked, and you are still working in areas where patients and their families can definitely and tangibly feel the impact of the advances in treatment. And like you said, it's always advancing. There's new stuff coming out. And you mentioned the advances in pancreatic cancer. It's amazing. But how does working in those areas where the impact is so felt influence the meaning of the work for you? Or what does that mean for you personally?
Personally, for me, it means a lot. I feel that most people, whether it's you're directly impacted by somebody that has cancer, you have cancer yourself, you're a survivor, you understand the number of people that have, died from cancer. It just really, really speaks to you in the sense that this is something that is going to continue and always be a challenge. So for me, one of the things that really, really stood out and made me want to I lost my train of thought because I'm sitting here thinking about my baby sister because she has ALL and she's been suffering with ALL now for almost 3 years. So she's gone through a first line of treatment, and I was her stem cell donor for her transplant. She did well for a while, but then her disease is now relapsed. So now we're on these later lines of therapy where we're trying to still find something to get her disease under control and potentially consider another transplant and try my other sister as a donor to see that might give her the cure that we're looking for. So I lost my train of thought just in thinking about her. It influences it a lot because I think about the caregivers and I think about how when people are excited about their life again and not thinking about their disease, then we've done our job as an organization. So I was at a conference called Longevity. So this is a survivorship conference for people that are living with lung cancer. So I was walking in and not thinking two things about it, getting a lay of the land in the conference hall, just walking around. And my lanyard has AstraZeneca written on it. And a patient came up to me and said, "My gosh, I just have to thank you so much." I'm like, I'm confused. I don't understand. She's like, "I have stage 4 EGFR mutated lung cancer, but I enrolled onto one of your clinical trials. And ever since I've been on this trial, my life has been amazing. I've been able to do a 5K. I've been able to play with my grandchildren. I'm good to go. I feel better than I've ever felt. And it's all thanks to your company, your clinical trial, and the science that saved my life. That day was the day when I realized how impactful the work that we do and how it shapes and changes people's lives. Like that day is stamped, tattooed in my brain, and it'll never leave me because it really, really showed how we're touching patients' lives.
I mean, how could you ever forget that? I'm getting teared up listening to it. I mean, anybody who's ever had a loss from cancer or any disease, really, but we lost one of my bosses passed away in 2024 from ovarian cancer, and she participated in trials. She was diagnosed at a late stage. It was very aggressive. And so, I mean, anytime there's advances in that area, or anytime we speak with someone working on advancing science in that area, an MSL or anyone, I mean, that you're doing the Lord's work. You're doing important stuff here. And oh my gosh, hearing stories like that from patients is amazing. How can you not feel fulfilled in your work and in your role as an MSL when you hear something like that? That's amazing. Gosh, okay, I am getting a little cheered up. Hard to move on from that, but there are so many aspiring MSLs who are looking to get into the MSL role, deciding on fellowship programs in, whether they should specialize in a specific therapeutic area or stay open to different opportunities, different therapeutic areas. Is there any advice that you would give to aspiring MSLs who are trying to decide whether they need to specialize or stay open therapeutically?
You know, it's one of those things where I always tell people you can strive for whatever you want ultimately, but I think it's more important to understand the role that you want in comparison to the disease state first. So if you know that you want to be a medical science liaison and you want to be able to work within that capacity, that should be the ultimate focus. Because the thing is that once you're in the MSL role, you can utilize your experience to navigate to the therapeutic areas of interest that you would prefer. Now, it might be a little bit of a challenge because depending on the therapeutic area, like for example, like in oncology, typically most companies like to see oncology experience in some capacity because of the disease state. But let's say you happen to get your start in respiratory, like let's say you're supporting like asthma or some sort of rare, lung-based disease. You can still utilize that experience if you have a passion for oncology and pivot that over into a career within lung cancer, for example,
Hmm.
right? So I think there's definitely multiple ways that you can get to what you want, but if you're really thinking about the MSL role and you want that, getting the MSL experience and having that is going to be paramount. And then if the disease state isn't necessarily the most aligned with what you want to do or what's most fulfilling to you at that point, then you could use your MSL experience to pivot into a disease area that you're more passionate about.
That's good advice. And really understanding your drivers as well. Like we talked about earlier, taking a look back and assessing your why, what you're looking to get out of this fellowship program, what you're looking to accomplish in your MSL role, your future MSL role. Kind of understanding those whys might help drive that decision for you as well. Well, I want to get into the topic of soft skills for the MSL role because I know we mentioned that at the beginning. We were going to touch on that. And one thing that you said in an earlier conversation that really stuck with me is that relationships are my currency. And I love that. Obviously, you've worked before pharmacy school in customer service, tech support, learning, development. And so all of those experiences were relationship centered and relationship building based. But when you say my relationships are my currency, what does that mean to you?
It means everything. It means everything to me personally. It means everything to me professionally as well. Honestly and truly, everybody likes to use all these various caveats. So for me, my relationships are my currency. For others, they'll say their network is their network. All those sorts of things, right? And the reason why is because, especially within the MSL role, cultivating relationships is how you're able to move the needle forward. That's how you're able to, get a site to consider a clinical trial. That's how you're able to collaborate with a site that might have an interesting concept that your company funds, and then that ends up leading to a huge scientific breakthrough. Or it could even mean that you're looking for a role and the relationship that you've built and developed with other people prior to you seeking this role is how you end up getting the role. And the reason why I say that is because that's how I landed in my current position right now. So there's a couple people that work at AstraZeneca that I knew before we ever worked in pharma. So one person, we were in the same internship program over the summer during pharmacy school. Another person, we had a rotation together while we were at BMS as students as well. These two individuals really, really were paramount in me joining AstraZeneca because they understood my expertise. They knew what I was passionate about, and they were able to speak for me in rooms that I was not in. So miraculously, one day I get a phone call and it's like, "Hey, Obi, I know that you really, really want to have a lung cancer role again, and I have the one that you're going to ultimately get." I said, "How do you know that?" They're like, "Because one, AstraZeneca is a great company, and two, because I know you and that team, and I think you'd be the perfect fit. Check your email. I've already sent you the referral. Go ahead and apply." And I did so, right? And now I've been here almost 3 years. But that relationship wasn't created because I was looking for a job. That relationship was created because we had a common interest and a common passion for pharma, pharmacy, drugs, patient care. That's the synopsis of our relationship. So even just from that aspect of it, that's how I ended up landing where I currently am. So relationships are my currency because no matter what walks of life that they come into play, that's what I use to be able to move forward or where I might look for assistance or help. Or also, I'm not always pulling from the bucket. I'm also filling the bucket up as well. So I'm definitely offering up my assistance, my help for anybody who might need it as well. So,
Mm.
it's a bi-directional sort of thing, and being able to maintain those strong interpersonal relationships is really, really helpful for the role and everything in life, to be honest.
Hmm. Well, and I feel like so many aspiring MSLs focus so heavily on the science that they maybe underestimate the people side of the role and how much that affects being a highly accomplished MSL. And it's going to be those soft skills that matter. At the end of the day, what do you feel like separates an MSL who is just knowledgeable from one who's mastered those soft skills and is genuinely impactful?
So it's definitely how you're able to connect with people. And then once you connect with them, how you're able to take what they give you and infuse that within your organization and do that over and over and over again. So oftentimes, whenever you meet new people, you need to connect with them. And it might take you some time to figure out what that connection point might be. Is it that you're both new parents? Is it that you both love dogs? Is it that you both have recently traveled to a new exciting destination, whatever it might be. But that connection is going to be something that is going to spark the interest of the other party whenever you're just initially meeting them. Next, you need to discover what's impactful to them. So you need to find out what they need help with, what they might need, where you can start to strategize on where you may be able to provide assistance. Once you do that, then you're able to provide more accurate and targeted recommendations to them through your conversation. And then after that, you're able to close whatever the deal might be. Is it you're securing an additional meeting with them? Is it that they're going to introduce you to the rest of their colleagues within their practice? That way you can come in and do an additional program for education. Or is it that they might be leading or heading an event like maybe an advisory board or a roundtable discussion for you after that discussion that you have, whatever it might be. So being able to connect, discover, recommend, and then close and do that over and over again with each individual that you meet is, I think, what separates the good from the great. And all those sorts of things have nothing really to do directly with the science and the data.
Not that we're downplaying the scientific
Of course
side
not.
of things.
Not at all.
But that's also why, the MSL role is such a coveted role and it's such a small community of people who work within medical affairs is because not everybody has that perfect mix. And so it really does take both sides of the equation to make a strong MSL, to make an impactful MSL, to move that needle forward for not just their company, but for science and disease states. So that's why it's just a special person. From the recruiting end, when people ask me what I do, I'm like, well, I recruit in medical affairs. Oh, that's cool. What is that? And I say, well, it's scientists that work in the pharmaceutical industry, and kind of give it a little brief explanation. And they're like, oh, scientists, that doesn't sound super interesting. I'm like, no, 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 no. These are scientists, but they have the most gregarious, bubbly personalities. So they actually are like, they're the needle in the haystack of the scientist world, where they are super engaging, super personable, super excited about what they're talking about. They're not boring scientists. So it's a special blend of that high scientific acumen, but also those people skills and being able to read the room and being able to deliver that complex information, all those soft skills that are so important, just being able to have both sides of that equation. So hopefully that what you were able to share speaks to some of these aspiring MSLs who have both sides, but they're only emphasizing the one side. So it's to their
Yeah,
advantage
you
to
got
do
to
both.
broaden the horizons a bit when it comes to the MSL role for sure. Oftentimes people get caught up in the data a lot and they want to talk about, oh, I know that this is in the pipeline, that's in the pipeline. That's all fine and dandy. However, you know, what does that ultimately mean? We all know pipeline assets, some make it, some don't. ultimately, what does all of that mean though? How does it translate? What's the story, right? So I often tell people, if you like sports and you listen to sports talk or any sort of newscasts in regards to sports, that sort of thing, and how people talk about the unknowns. So right now we're in the NBA finals. So everybody's talking about the Knicks and the Spurs and thinking about who's going to win and why, all those sorts of things. MSLs have conversations just like that. The only difference is, instead of it being basketball, they're talking about the science, right? So they're looking at what things currently are. They're looking at what's to come in terms of the pipeline or future studies that are being conducted and we're waiting for readouts for. But then they have that dynamic discussion about it, right? What are the possibilities? They're asking questions of their doctors on what they think might happen, how might this shift or change based on these various endpoints or variables, right? So it's the same sort of conversation. The only difference is just the subject matter.
Absolutely. Well, I know we're getting close to the end of our time, so I want to just get a little bit of advice from you for PharmD students or recent graduates who are maybe interested in medical affairs. I guess a two-pronged question here. One, how early should they start preparing? And two, what experiences do you recommend that they seek out during pharmacy school?
So I don't think it's ever too early to start looking and start preparing, because we've spent all this time talking about how valuable relationships are, right? So these relationships, if you start them early enough, by the time you need to tap in for access to them, they're well developed, right? And you probably broaden out your network a little bit more. So you can start as early as your first year. So for that summer, once you finish your coursework, you can look for an internship at a pharmaceutical company in any sort of capacity. I know the next thing that some people might be listening to start thinking, well, what if I don't have access to any of those places, right? Based on where your pharmacy school is located or your means and that sort of thing. That's fine as well. Now, what you want to think about and consider is potentially, if you're working within a hospital, do they have MSLs that go there, right? Try to see if you can touch base with anyone from pharmaceutical industry throughout the experiences that you do have access to, whether it's through your rotations, that sort of thing. So being able to play the hand that you're dealt, so to speak, and then go from there, because at the end of the day, you need to be able to gain experiences, but they're not always going to come in that straight line path of an internship, fellowship, rotations, that sort of thing all the time. But again, if you can get those opportunities, definitely get them, because they're going to be super helpful, because there's a little bit less obstacles in the way. But there's a lot of people who work within pharmaceutical industry that didn't have any of those experiences and were able to cross over, because people that work within the industry come from all different places.
Absolutely. And I think that's great advice for even those that don't have the resources available, like you said, because of location or things like that. But just giving them the go ahead to think outside the box, get creative, be intentional, be strategic as much as you can and look for those opportunities. Are there any misconceptions that PharmDs may have about fellowship or even the MSL role that you would like to take this platform to clear up?
Misconceptions. I don't know if there's necessarily misconceptions, but I definitely think that there's misunderstandings on what the role actually is and what the role does. Oftentimes, when people hear the term medical science liaison, they're clueless because it's pretty niche, right? So I'm just going to go ahead and take this opportunity to say that medical science liaisons are essentially the external expert for various pharmaceutical companies that are able to speak on the science. And the reason why this is very vital and very important is because we've talked about how clinical trials are impactful and important. However, clinical trials don't necessarily mean that the product or the indication is approved by the FDA. So we're in a highly regulated industry. So to be able to have scientific conversations, it has to be done in a fair and balanced way, which is done through being able to present both the efficacy of a drug, so how well it works, in addition to what are some of the caveats on how it works, the safety profile, right? So MSLs are able to have these levels of conversation, whether the product is approved or not, through scientific exchange, because it's more of a peer-to-peer discussion than it's being able to be held within the scientific community. that is not viewed as sales or promotional in any way. So MSLs don't have sales quotas. There's nothing that we're selling as an MSL. There's roles for that. There are sales positions within pharma organizations. The MSL role is not one of them, though.
Thank you for clarifying. There's a lot of mix up. We clarify that from here several times a day, just explaining, talking to people that maybe don't have a full grasp. They are two separate roles and they do not mix in any way as far as their responsibilities. So, well, we are at the end of our time. I want to do our quick lightning round. What's one skill that every aspiring MSL should start building right now?
If you're better at it than me, be organized, organized, organized. I'm still trying to get better. Other than that, I would definitely say be comfortable with the uncomfortable. So there's going to be a lot of times when you don't know certain things, and that's okay. But you need to be resourceful in terms of how you find out what those answers are.
Yes. And don't make up an answer. Just say,
Never make up an answer.
I don't know, but let me get back to you. That's a good one. What's one habit that's helped you grow in medical affairs?
One habit that's definitely helped me grow is being able to make science relatable. So I used the sports analogy earlier before. So being able to take science and scientific storytelling to the point where it's almost like you're telling your best friend about what you did over the weekend. So those conversational skills, I think, are what are super helpful and makes people more engaged and want to speak with.
I love it. And last one here, what's one piece of advice you give your younger self before pharmacy school?
The one piece of advice that I'd give myself, other than buying certain stocks with certain companies, I'm just kidding. No, the one piece of advice that I would give myself would be don't doubt yourself. So if you have a goal, set it, strive for it, and then understand what you're striving for and work towards that each day without thinking about what is at the very end, because what you might find at the end is probably going to be more than you can anticipate.
Yeah. Don't doubt yourself. That's a really good one. And it's a good one to end it on. Obi, this was such a great conversation. I love how practical and honest this discussion's been, especially because there are aspiring MSLs who are listening, who are trying to figure out how to navigate pharmacy school and fellowships and all the while doing networking and trying to do that and all the different paths that there are into medical affairs. And I think one of the biggest takeaways from your story should be that there really isn't one perfect blueprint for becoming an MSL. Your story had a lot of twists and turns before even starting pharmacy school, but you were intentional, having that intentional mindset, being relationship focused, being willing to create opportunities for yourself can make all the difference. So thank you again for sharing your journey and your perspective with us today. I so enjoyed hearing everything that you've had to say.
Thank you so much, Linda, for inviting me. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. And to all our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, make sure you subscribe on YouTube, leave us a review or a like. And as always, check out the show notes below. We do have a link there where you can connect with us and share your feedback, your suggestions for new topics, or anything you'd like to share with us. We always love hearing what topics you want us to cover next and your thoughts on this topic. So thank you again for tuning in, for listening to MSL 411, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to share the link, let your friends know, and of course, connect with us on LinkedIn. And if you want more information on today's topic, please feel free to reach out. Be sure to check back soon as we continue to explore the topics that matter most to you in medical affairs.